The wind worried the old stones, a ceaseless, thin moan that made Winterfell feel older than the north itself. Snow came in sifted veils, swirling through portcullis teeth and piling waist-deep against the inner walls, erasing footprints as fast as they were made. Torches hissed in their brackets. The smell of pitch mixed with the metal breath of frost and the faint smoke of peat fires set low to stretch their use through nights that no longer felt like nights at all. It was a winter made of silence and the long intake of breath before a scream. Jon stood on the battlements with Ghost pressed to his hip, the direwolf's coat half starlight, half ghost of the snow itself. Below, the yards were latticed with ropes and lines and stacked with the pale glimmer of dragonglass. The smithy had not slept for 3 days. Neither had Jon, though he could not remember precisely how long wakefulness had become its own kind of night. He listened for wings. Only once had he stood atop the wall and felt its vastness hum beneath his boots, a mountain cut by men and joined to the sky. Now the wall was a memory that lay broken in a slow arc of white ruin, and even the north's wind seemed changed by the breach, emptier and deeper, like breath taken into a lung that had been cut open. Men did not speak of Eastwatch if they could help it. They used other words instead. The river is icefast. The food trains are late. The Umber Boy will not answer. Everyone knew where those words led. A light step behind him, soft as fresh-fallen snow. "You're cold," Sansa said, drawing her cloak closer, rust-red wool woven with thorn and leaf. He made a small sound that might have been assent. He did not look away from the dark sky. "Everyone's cold. Not the ones with scales." Her tone held no malice, but it had a barbed edge, a reminder that dragons ate and burned and slept while men counted sacks of grain and froze their fingers stiff setting spears. He did not blame her for it. He did not blame anyone for the small cruelties they put in their voices to make sense of what was coming. "They're searching," he said. "She won't let them tire. She thinks it will bring her peace to find him, to see him." Jon did not answer. A dragon reborn into ice and blue fire. A son torn from his mother by a hand that was not a hand. There was no peace to be had in such seeing. He had watched the breach at Eastwatch from the wrong end of the distance, his mouth full of cold air and a cry that never came out. He had seen the blue flame, if flame it could be called, eating stone as if it were snow. He had seen the wall open its ribs. He had thought, absurdly, of a ribcage pried apart to make way for a knife. Sansa's hand brushed his sleeve, a hint of warmth against the cold shell he wore. "Bran's asking for you." He turned then. Her face was pale, mouth set firm. Worry had carved neat lines down each side of it. The girl he had known had learned to hide her fear like a lady from a song, but the woman let it live in her eyes and walked forward anyway. He nodded and followed her down from the walls, ghosting along, tail low and ears forward, alert to sounds men could not hear. The Godswood was a fissure of red and white inside the gray of Winterfell, a wound that did not heal because it was not meant to. Snow lay undisturbed beneath the heart tree. Bran sat in his chair, eyes the color of old lake ice, hands folded, as if he had always been there and had been waiting not merely a morning but the length of seasons. The weirwood's face looked down, mouth petaled in a blood-red pout that might have been a murmur or a grief. "Bran," Jon said, soft as if he had come into a chamber where a sick man lay asleep. Bran's gaze went beyond him and through him, as it often did now, as if Jon were a thin skin stretched over a light he could see. "He screams," Bran said without preamble. Sansa's breath caught. Jon stood very still. "Who?" "The dragon that was your lover's son and died and did not die. He screams, but not in a way you can hear with your ears." He blinked once, an almost human motion. "He remembers heat. That's the worst of it for him." "Viserion," Sansa said under her breath, as if naming him might call a gentler ghost. Jon felt absurdly as if he ought to offer apology to the air. "Can you see him?" he asked. "Truly see him?" Bran's eyes did not change, yet the snow itself seemed to hold its breath. "He is bound. There is a thread in him that isn't part of what a dragon is. The thread is ice. It goes out of him and into a cold that isn't air or snow or a man. Exactly. He is made to remember wrong things. Can you cut it? The question came out harder than he meant it to, iron on iron. I don't think it can be cut. Bran tilted his head. But things that are bound can be bound again. Elsewhere. To something else. To what? Sansa asked. To blood, perhaps, Bran said. To fire, to memory, to a name. We are made of what we remember. Even beasts. The heart tree creaked softly. A sound like old leather bending. Jon thought of Rhaegal's eye, green as bottle glass and twice as alive. Of Drogon's huge rough tongue tasting the air. Of Viserion's pale gold, the color of wheat in a summer he could scarcely remember now. He thought of Ghost's heartbeat under his hand when the world went black in a courtyard stinking of onions and pitch, and of the way the wolf had found him again after death. Bound, Bran said. Bound again. Tell me what I need, Jon said. You won't like it, Bran replied. But you will agree to it anyway. They went to the great hall because rooms with fat oak tables and smoke blackening the timbers could hold men's panic better than the pale sacrament of the gods would. The hall was a low sun of firelight and mutter when Jon and Sansa entered. It turned its face to him as a plant will when the light shifts. Davos was there with his hard hands and plain voice, Tyrion with his mouth corked in thought. Sam cradling a stack of books wrapped in cloth. Arya moving along the wall like a blade finds a seam in armor. Missandei's quiet gaze found the doors and measured the weather that came through them. Grey Worm stood behind her, a column of stillness. And Daenerys, at the far end by the high table, was at once the most firelit and the most winter-made thing there. Her hair was braided tight in the fashion of riders. Frost had caught in it and stayed, pearls of ice that gleamed when she turned her head. She looked like a queen carved by someone who had once loved the sea and had learned to love a furnace instead. Your brother says he has a way to bind the Night King's hold, Tyrion said, as if offering a toast it would be unseemly not to drink. I confess the words sound promising and terrible in equal measure. Bran's chair squeaked as it was pushed to the end of the table. He did not lift his voice, yet the hall's murmur drew back from it naturally. The Night King uses what the children made, skin-changing and songs and stone that remembers cold. He makes wrong use of right things. If we can give Viserion something more true to remember, something stronger, the thread will go slack. The dragon is dead, Grey Worm said, not unkindly, only with a soldier's need for edges. Death is a rope, Bran replied. It is not a door. The rope can be cut, but some knots are older than others. Sam untied his cloth and spread the books as carefully as if he were setting down swaddled infants. Dragonglass obsidian, he corrected himself automatically, was used as a focus, that's the word, for the children. It holds what you ask it to hold. There are accounts, fragments, really, of hearts cut and obsidian stones put where they had no right to be, and the memories of trees called to bind men in ways that were probably terrible. He swallowed, cheeks pinking. But binding isn't only for harm. I don't think it is. I think there were other uses. Tyrion's brow went up. Do those other uses involve giving a dead dragon to the man with the least practice riding the living ones? Daenerys's look was a quiet slash. He was carried by Rhaegal as if he weighed nothing. I do weigh nothing, Jon said dryly. A flicker of that old lightning smile crossed her face and was gone. He won't be carried, she said. He will have to leap. Jon found he was already nodding before his mind had weighed the scales. A leap and something sharp, and the idea of a thread slackening somewhere out in a cold that had no breath. It was madness, but so was every plan he had ever liked that saved anyone. We'll need something to set, he said to Sam, pointing his chin at the books. A hook. A keystone, Sam said, relieved to have a word that sounded more like a thing a man might hold. A piece of obsidian that's been treated and touched. With blood, perhaps, and with the weirwood sap. The old tongue or Valyrian would do for the shaping words. Better if both. And the steel. The casing should be something forged where there's true heat. His eyes flicked to Daenerys and away again. Dragonfire, Tyrion said. How very neat. Our forges are suddenly not for show. Gendry was fetched by Arya, who led him in like a hound by a leash that did not exist. He smelled of burned leather and honest sweat, his hair matted with steam and soot. He listened while Sam described the keystone with uncharacteristic economy. Then he rubbed his thumb along the edge of the table and nodded once. "I'll need good iron to bind the glass in its shell and shape it to bite. I can make it a thorn. Thorn goes in and won't come out." "Length?" Davos asked. "You'll be up a dragon's neck, lad. Not picking your teeth." Gendry's mouth crooked. "As long as a hand, a little more. Any longer and you'll never keep hold." His glance slid toward Jon's gloved hands and then away. "A shaft, no." He shook his head. "It'll have to be set in a hilt you can bind to your wrist, put it into him and leave it there, like a splinter under the nail." Daenerys's throat moved. Her voice when it came was level. "Will it hurt him?" "Yes," Bran said. "But the hurt will be honest. The one he has now is not." She set a palm flat on the table. "Do it." They planned with the precision of men who knew how fast plans unraveled. Gendry went back to his forge and the dragons were called to breathe. Drogon came first, vast and irritable at being asked to let his breath be caged. Rhaegal followed, green eyes regarding the furnace as if it were a small and insufficient cousin. Heat turned the smithy into a dream of glass, every surface sweating, air bending itself into a wavering curtain. Gendry worked like a fisherman who has learned to wrestle storms, hard without flinching, speaking in bare words to the men at the bellows and the boy carrying buckets, nodding to Arya when she appeared in the doorway and leaned an hour long without seeming to move her ribs, watching him make a weapon that would not kill. Sam and Bran and the weirwood did their part. The heart tree's sap was gathered in a shallow iron bowl, red as summer cherries, thick as honey, smelling faintly of rain on new leaves. Sam pricked Jon's thumb and Daenerys's, and he did not flinch when she held out her hand to him. Their blood slid into the sap in small strings that disappeared as if they had always been meant to be there. Sam muttered in the old tongue, words that tasted of bark and rock, and then in Valyrian, the syllables careful despite their unfamiliarity. Bran's eyes went away. After a time that might have been minutes or might have been an hour, he said simply, "It's ready." They did not tell Sansa all of it. She knew enough to know the danger, and she watched them prepare as one watches a loved one pack a bag for a voyage you cannot take with them. When she spoke, it was to make two small changes that mattered. Extra ropes, new knots for the anchors at Long Lake where they meant to set their snares. She remembered the way ram-hunting men held the line when hoofs hit snow halfway up a cliff face. She told them which rock would break and which would hold. It was not romance to measure rope and point out a rock that peeled like a scab when wet, but it felt, to Jon listening, more like love than the songs had ever understood. The lake lay east of the weeping water, a place where the world hunkered down and showed a little of its bone beneath the snow. Long Lake was a frozen mirror now, wind making serpent scales across it. They went by night because night was what the enemy understood, and also because they had no choice. Men and women moved like shadows behind sleds of rope and iron, dragging glass spearheads bundled in sacking, anchors fat-bellied as sleeping pigs. Davos climbed along the shore and spat into the ice. He did not hide his contempt for it. "I've known seas," he said. "And this one's the kind that eats crews whole and leaves nothing but a ring for some lord's son to wear." "It'll have to eat a dragon instead," Jon said, then felt the indecency of it. He looked up into the star-blunt dark. The air had that oddly clear feeling that meant storm inside the next 2 hours. Daenerys came on Drogon with Rhaegal behind, their wings beating the cold into something harder. She hovered and did not land. Dragons on the ice would do no one any good. From above she looked colder than the cold, carved out of it and set in place by a hand that had learned smoothness and patience. No crown, no words either. She turned Drogon's head once, to be certain of Jon in the frost below, and then she went to her place in the sky. The traps were ingenious in the way of men who had to fight things bigger than they were. 2 old scorpions had been dragged from the ruins of a Carhold tower and mended. Gendry had remade their teeth in black glass. The nets were hardly nets at all. Spidering ropes with barbed iron weights that would bite and hold, anchored to rocks Sansa had chosen and hidden beneath snow like Arctic fish. Bonfires were built with dry wood saved for months, pitch thick as treacle, stacked so that one torch would bring a spire of heat and light roaring up. Heat was the bait. Light was merely the excuse. Jon tested the hilt Gendry gave him, the glass thorn caged in iron. The thong meant to lash his wrist until his hand went white. He tried to imagine the motion. A man running up the rib of a hill, slipping, getting his weight under him, driving a short knife between two plates in armor. He could imagine it too easily. He put the hilt into the pouch at his hip and tied it in so tight that Davos grunted. "You'll never get it out quick," the Onion Knight said. "I won't need quick. I'll need not to drop it." Davos considered and nodded. "Fair." Ghost bumped Jon's thigh and then went off into the dark to find Arya. She had taken it upon herself to prowl the lake margins with a line cutter and a mind full of weak points. He watched Ghost's form melt into the night and felt the familiar tug deep in his chest. A reassurance, a thread of his own. He wondered, briefly and intensely, if he could ever follow a thread like Bran's into another skull. He had never tried to step so far outside himself as Bran did. He had never wanted to. He could just about fit into Ghost's silence, into the way the world sounded through a wolf's ears. A dragon was another country. Bran had said as much, quietly, earlier beneath the weirwood. "You won't be able to go inside him like I can. But you won't need to. You only need to be at the place where the rope changes hands." "Is that what I'll be?" Jon had asked. "Hands?" "Not just hands," Bran replied. "A name. Names are ropes too." They lit the first fire to the south edge of the lake and sent the heat up like a signal to a sky that might be watching. The flame leapt hungrily as if it remembered summer and wished to eat it whole. Men moved away from it instinctively because heat in this winter felt indecent. The second fire went up to the east, a whisper of smoke that the wind tore to threads. The third waited, unlit, near the scorpions, coiled to bloom when needed. Jon stood in the lee of a boulder and watched the sky. Drogon and Rhaegal circled in dark arcs above, patient as buzzards and twice as deadly. Daenerys did not signal. She expected him to move when he had to, and he would. His breath smoked as if he were a dragon himself, a small and laughable one with bones that would snap if he fell from any height worth speaking of. The first sign was not sight but a change in the air. The cold shifted, thinned, somehow, but sharpened too, as when a blade is lifted from a whetstone and has learned a new way to cut. Sound went strange. Then a shape came, pale and fast, a comet without a tail. Viserion. He did not look like Daenerys's boy. He looked like a story told to frighten children about what happens when you love something that can fly. His wings were broken lace made of rigid ice, each vein thickened and rimed, each membrane stiff. New holes had been burned in him by something that had not been fire. Blue burned from within him, a lantern trapped in ribs. His roar was not a roar but the sound of glaciers deciding to move. Men ducked at it. Jon's stomach did something small and sour, and then steadied. Viserion stooped. The fires were a lure he could not ignore, once dragon that he was. He stroked past the first on a gust that knocked men flat and sent a long ribbon of blue down across the second. The world where it struck became a cliff face shedding itself. Wood did not burn so much as unmake. Snow became steam that screamed. Doric columns of ice grew where heat had been. The bonfires died as if they had never been. But it did not matter. Heat was in the air now. He remembered it. He circled. "Now," Davos said, not shouting, and yet everyone heard him. Men hauled on ropes. Metal sang. Scorpion arms rattled forward with a sound that shook the fillings in teeth. The first two bolts leapt and went wide, fast as sin. The third struck, glass biting ice with a clean, obscene crack. The fourth lodged in a wing's stiffened edge. Ropes went taut. Anchors bit. The lake groaned like a living thing and showed a long dark line where the ice wanted to part. Viserion fought. The ropes burned where they ran over ice, smoking. Anchors leapt and then came down again, biting harder. The dragon's great feet found the ice and slashed it. When he reared, the ice cracked, and men found themselves half knee-deep in slush that froze to their boots mid-calf. A weight astonishing as a small hill landed full on the woven ropes. and all at once the world was nothing but pull. Jon moved without remembering the decision to do so. Regal came down out of the dark as if he had been waiting for an excuse to fall on his brother. He hit Viserion's shoulder obliquely, a shove more than a strike, just enough to turn the head away from the Scorpion cruise. A rush of blue cut a furrow across the lake. The ice screamed and healed wrong. Jon saw Daenerys bring Drogon across the top of the fight, higher, not striking, watching. It was not that she trusted him to do what had to be done. It was that there was nothing else she could trust. The rope across Jon's hips jerked him once and almost took him down. He lunged instead, boot skidding, then catching, then skidding again. The line of the ropes drew an ugly geometry across the ice, all angles and frantic arcs that made no sense and would kill a man if he forgot which one he was holding. He did not forget. The weight of the thorn at his hip was a small, heavy moon. He could feel the cold from it. A clean cold that was not the Night King's but the kind inside a winter apple taken from a cellar and cut in a still room. Viserion's head came round. Jon ran toward it. Later he would recall nothing between the first step and the iron stink of breath from a mouth that no longer remembered meat except as memory. The dragon's eye was a pit of blue so deep it made the north look warm. Jon made the stupid human mistake of looking at it and almost drowned. He cut his gaze away and saw instead the seam where jaw became skull, and then he was close enough that there was no room for thought at all. He went to his knees in slush that had frozen mid-breath. He drove the thorn. It felt as if he had pushed his hand into a winter river and found, beneath the ice, something that had been waiting for him for years. The iron hilt bit his palm. The thong burned his wrist. The obsidian broke through the ice-crusted skin over bone with an obscene cleanliness. The dragon's body lifted him as ropes lift a load from the dock, and Jon's shoulder drank a pain that went to the marrow. For a heartbeat there was nothing but cold, cold the size of the sky. Then the rope changed hands. He did not see so much as become the remembering of it. He knew heat as a language. He knew the feel of sun on scales that had not yet learned the word for shadow. He remembered a hand gentle on a muzzle and a woman's smell of salt and sweat and leather, the world drawn in a way that made sense because it smelled like her skin. He remembered sky, not as blue but as wind that poured around wing bones and filled spaces he had never had before. He remembered a brother's tale flicking with mockery and the sudden joy of the chase over a city that had once been called Meereen. He remembered the other brother's eye, green, bright, and kind. He remembered her voice. He remembered fire. The cold thread was in that remembering like a hair in the mouth. It was not part of any of it, and yet in all of it, a thin, stubborn thing that tasted of iron pulled through salt. Jon felt where it went. A line walking away across the lake and through the air to a place that was not a place at all but a shape of will. He knew that will, though he had never seen the man who carried it before the day at Hardhome, and even then it had been something seen in a reflection. He knew because it was the part of winter that wanted no mornings afterward. He took hold of the thread where it passed under his hand. It did not feel like anything a hand could hold. He gave it his name, the one he had owned when he did not own much else. He gave it the wolf steadiness. He gave it because he could not help it. The stubborn bone-deep love he carried like a scar for a woman who was both storm and shelter. He did not beg. He did not know how. He asked the dragon if he wanted to remember the heat instead of the cold. Something answered from the place pain lives. It did not have words. It was all at once young. Jon felt his own body again and realized he was still driving the thorn in with the whole intention of him. Viserion's head reared back and slammed down, throwing slush and shards. The rope screamed. Across the lake someone fell and screamed too, a high human sound. Regal roared, a living answer to the dragon under Jon's hands. Drogon's shadow crossed them like an eclipse. The eye blue shivered. Jon pushed until he felt the glass seat itself in bone. It would have killed a man. It nearly killed him. The force of the dragon's voice blew through him as if he were a reed in a flooded stream. He held it like a drowned man holds breath. He thought, for a tearing instant, of a small boy in a kitchen stealing a roll, of a man burning at a stake smiling in the way of men who have already forgiven too much, of ghost's fur between his fingers that night beneath the wall when his lungs stopped and started again under a knife. He gave back everything those images were and hoped a dragon understood. The cold thread hummed and then went slack in his grip. Viserion screamed. Not the glacier sound. Not the wrong music. The scream that tore the night then was the sound of an animal setting a bone that has been broken so long it learned a new way to hurt. He tore at the ropes with his teeth and his hands and felt them loosen because men on the scorpions had seen it or understood it, or simply because they could not keep their fear from slipping into their fingers. The anchors bit one last time and then skated, drawing white curtains across the lake's face. Viserion surged up, front claws gouging ice, wings hurling snow in a glittering wall. Jon was carried with him, up and up, ice and rope and human plans falling away. Only then did Viserion look at him. The eye was still rimmed with frost. The blue burned in it, but there was something else now, too. A pale gold behind the glacier, like light seen under old ice. Jon felt that same youngness again, a confused tenderness that made his breath snag. He put his hand, carefully, on the cold roughness of bone at the jaw's hinge. "Easy," he whispered, absurdly, to something that could bite him in half without thinking about it. "Easy, lad, easy." It should have been Daenerys's hand and Daenerys's voice. He knew it. He felt it like a wrong note in a song he otherwise loved. But it was his hand there now, and a place had to be filled while the world tried to end. Viserion's jaw closed on emptiness with a click like knives set in a drawer. He snorted a plume of steam. The Night King felt the slackening of the rope. Whether he felt it as surprise or rage, no one could say, because his face did not hold those shapes. But the snow told them. It stopped falling for one breath and then came sideways, a wall driven by will. The shapes on the lake grew smeared and small. Men went to their knees and crawled because up and down had ceased to be certain things. Up, however, was still up for dragons. Drogon climbed, wings beating the blizzard into disorder. Regal cut under and across Viserion, a brother's half-challenge, half-guard. Daenerys's hair streamed behind her and froze in strange strands that caught stars. Jon felt the thing under him decide with a kind of tired dignity where it would put its weight now. Put it away from the cold thread. Put it alongside the other two. He laughed. The sound, snatched thin by the wind, startled him. He could not remember the last time laughter had come in clean. "Can you ride him?" Daenerys's voice struck his ear not by sound but by closeness when Drogon swept near, her face fierce and unreadable. "I'm riding him now," Jon called back. That was bravado. He was being carried. The difference mattered. "Can you see him?" he added, and did not have to say more. She looked. He watched her look, and what he saw in her face almost undid him. The quick, raw unfurling of grief that had been twisted into a weapon for days, relaxing its grip just enough to be grief again. She touched her palm to Drogon's neck. The great black head tilted toward Viserion with a sound that was almost a question. Viserion answered. It was not a roar. It was a small sound as dragon sounds measure, a softening in the throat, a thing a kit might say to his dam when she turns and finds him after being lost. It was all wrong, too, coming from a jaw that showed bone and teeth rimed in ice and holes where flesh had been. It was like hearing a lullaby sung by a voice that had swallowed snow. Tore Daenerys open as neatly as any blade. Jon saw her sway and then set her spine as if she had been pressed into a new shape and would keep it because that was what she had taught herself to do. They did not stay to test tenderness against a storm that had thoughts. Davos had already ordered a retreat, the man's sense for ships serving him on ice. The scorpions were dragged back on sleds, men's shoulders leaning into harness until their faces went mottled. Ropes were cut. Fires were left unlit. The dead did not pursue quickly. There was no hurry in them, but the wind pursued. The army of the living learned again what it means to move when the night wants you still. They reached Winterfell before dawn. The walls seemed to lean, as if the old stones could see what came behind the men they sheltered. Viserion hung above the yard like a star going out and then coming back. He would not come to the ground. Jon coaxed and he came lower, and then lower still until ghostly frost blown from his nostrils rattled the pennants and set the torches guttering. But he would not let his feet touch. Drogon landed, claws gouging the packed snow to the mud beneath. Rhaegal landed beside him, head tilted, eyes steady on his brother. Daenerys stood below Viserion and spoke in Valyrian, soft command threaded with a mother's tease. Jon did not understand the words precisely. He understood the weave of them. Viserion listened with the whole of his winter body. For a moment Jon thought he would come down. For a moment he wanted only to see those talons sink and hold and the great weight settle and the world nod yes. Viserion's head dipped and he exhaled a long streamer of white that broke into glitter. Then he lifted a little, unwilling to test the ice in himself against the ground. "It's enough," Daenerys said, and no one knew whether she meant for now or forever. Her eyes shone, and not with tears. There was a place beyond grief, a cold country with no maps. She had been traveling there for days. She would not ask anyone to walk it with her, but she would not keep them from it if they chose. Jon slid down from the ridge of ribs that served as a withers. His legs were not his for a moment. They remembered the dragon's motion and tried to keep moving up and down when the ground insisted on staying put. Ghost came to him and pressed a head against his knee harder than usual, as if to put something back in him that had shaken loose. Jon set his hand on the broad skull. "I've bound him to you," Bran said behind him, startling him only a little. No one heard Bran arrive anymore. "For now, not forever. You can't take forever." "Will he fight?" Jon asked. "Against Blue," Bran said. It was not exactly an answer. It was the only one they would. Yet, they did not have long. Long nights compress time into a shape that makes fools of plans. The dead had no need of sleep or bread, no fear of blisters or frostbite, no men to desert, no horses to founder. They came like weather. The living were very good at dying. Winterfell filled its trenches with pitch and pointed stakes and prayers. The young wolf's bannermen sang muffled through their scarves. Knights of the Vale sat their horses like iron pegs hammered into the ground. The Unsullied stood as if standing were the only thing they had ever been taught to do, which it was. Northmen knotted their scarves and spat and shouldered shields that had been their fathers. Daenerys walked the yard and let men look at her and feel that looking changed them. She did not promise them anything except her presence. Tyrion and Varys and Missandei drew lines on parchment with ink and moved pebbles and changed their minds half a dozen times. Sansa listened to the cook and measured barley. Arya vanished and reappeared with cold on her breath and a smile that had nothing to do with happiness. Sam moved like a man who did not expect to sleep again while the world lasted. Jorah cleaned his sword twice as thoroughly as necessary and then spoke to Daenerys, very low, and put his hand where hers had rested on his arm 1,000 years ago on the other side of the world. She nodded once. He went away satisfied with something that had nothing to do with winning. Jon did what he could. Tightened a strap, lifted a spear, set his weight to a wheel when it needed moving, watched the sky. He went to the crypts and stood before the old kings and spoke to one or two whose names he knew. He did not light a candle because there were not enough candles by half for the living. When he returned to the yard he found Daenerys there, one hand on Drogon's shoulder, the other fisted tight by her side. "He remembers me," she said without greeting. "He does and he doesn't. He's like a song that's been played on a broken harp." "He chose," Jon said. "It still hurts." She tilted her head and regarded him, amused despite everything. "You were never this wise when I met you. I was never this tired either." He hesitated. Then, because what else was there to do but speak the whole truth when the world was this close to ending, he added, "Rhaegal will carry me. Viserion." He glanced up, where the pale shadow hovered just above the highest towers. "Will follow me this once because Bran's hands are on the rope. But if I die, you will not be able to call him down. He'll go back to whatever waits for him in the cold." "Then don't die," she said, with the ordinary cruelty of love. He smiled despite himself. "All right." They fought at dusk because dusk came early. The first wave of the dead arrived like a cough rolling down a long hall. They hit the trenches and poured over them where the stakes hadn't been set closely enough. Arrows went out and were swallowed. The Dothraki scream was a brief candle in a hurricane and then a darkness. Yora returned from that darkness on a lathered horse with blood frozen into his beard. Melisandre came when the night was already thick and did what she could to turn fire into a wall. It burned. It burned, and it burned men with it, and sometimes it failed to burn the right things at all. The dead do not mind if you make mistakes. Drogon went over the dead line like a storm coming off the narrow sea. He tore strips of them into ash that blew away and came back as if the wind had learned cruelty from the Night King. Rhaegal answered, green fire finding purchase on things that ought not to have been able to burn. Jon felt the old exhilaration lift him despite everything. The brief soaring sense of a world that is small and answerable when you are higher than it. Then he felt the truth of it, that the world was larger than any fire he could throw at it. He pointed Rhaegal's fury where it would keep men alive another half hour. It felt like pouring water through a sieve. Viserion hung back as if unsure of the air. Then the cold came, the deep kind that the world itself respected. It moved with a mind. The snow fell thicker and then thinner and then thicker again. Confusion laid over tactics. The Night King was near, though none could say precisely where, because being near him was a strange geometry that folded space and made distance new. He had no dragon now. He did not need one to be the storm. Hold. Jon heard himself say into the wind that would drag his words out of his mouth and snap them like sailcloth. Hold. Hold. The words mattered only where they hit an ear that had decided not to run. He saw Theon's line of men go back toward the Godswood. Each step measured. Each face turned toward a duty that had been chosen and named. He saw Arya on the battlements and then not on the battlements. He saw Sansa in the crypts like a statue of a lady from a world where ladies had husbands who came home. He saw Sam stumble and then stand again because a man who has read enough knows as many ways to be a coward as to be brave and has chosen anyway. He saw Davos light a torch and hurl it, and when it failed to take, try again. He saw Yora draw his sword and find his queen with his eyes as if he could protect her just by looking. Viserion came low over the nearest press of dead and opened his mouth. For a breath Jon feared blue. What came out was white. It was a breath like the center of a fire, the part hottest and least seen. A blast that hammered the dead and blew them apart not into ash but into a sparkling dust that fell and did not rise. Where it passed, the dead slowed and the living did not freeze. It had no heat and yet it killed what lived wrong. Men looked up at it with their mouths open, laughter and terror twins in the sound they made. Jon felt something loosen under his sternum and went higher to take the line that Viserion's breath had cut and make it a path. For a time measured. In bones breaking and men screaming and men not screaming because they had learned how to be quiet when they died. The living held. Then Rhaegal bucked as something heavy and wrong hit his flank. Talons that belonged to a thing that had once been a giant eagle torn from shadow. Jon had just enough time to think not yet before the world went over. He did not fall far. The Godswood's canopy caught him, shook him, dropped him again into a drift that had been packed by footsteps and was therefore as soft as a brick. He tried to stand. His right knee sent a message to his head that was not a word but meant no. He rolled, found the trunk of the heart tree with his left shoulder, and came up spitting blood and needles. Ghost found him, the wolf's eyes Winter's last good green. Ghost put his body between Jon and the nearest dead who had found their way through the trench and the ash and the white breath and were now going to do what they had come to do. Go, Jon said. Go to the... He could not say it. He needed the wolf here and there at the same time. The world does not care what a man needs. Ghost went where he was told. Jon hobbled. He made the Godswood not with speed but with a kind of relentless small-motioned will. He went because he had always gone where the worst thing was. He went because that was what he was made of. The men at the ring were falling carefully, making their deaths into stops on a staircase a girl might climb. He saw Theon in the center, his spear a long extension of a soul that had been torn and stitched and torn again until it learned to hold. He saw Bran sitting very straight, as if the chair that held him were a throne and the weirwood a court. The snow fell differently here, a little less sure of itself, as if remembering a spring somewhere deep in wood. The Night King came between the trees with no hurry at all. It is a strange thing, to see a thing so old that your eyes do not know what to make of it. It is stranger still when it wears a face shaped like a man's, because then your mind tries to drape human things over it. Intention, humor, malice, weariness, like a cloak over a boulder. Jon felt the wrongness of it like a taste. He moved and could not say later whether he meant to move toward the heart tree or toward the thing that had ripped a dragon out of the sky. Theon ran first. It was not a charge so much as a decision to sprint down the last yard of his life with his feet in the right order. The spear went in. The spear went out. It was a lesson in cold. The Night King killed him as one might brush aside a branch, with attention but no interest. Theon had made himself the kind of man who would run at a god to save a boy, and the world will always remember that in a quiet way that is worth more than songs. The dead closed. The living bowed in that shape that is both kneeling and falling. The Night King went forward. The blizzard that had been a wall outside went thinner here, as if even storms had to move more carefully in this place. A space opened that had not been there. Jon did not see Arya. He saw a motion that was absence of snow. He did not think. He shouted once, harsh and raw, a sound that had no words and all the words in it at once. A sound that had in it a brother calling a sister by name in a yard when they were small, and a man on a wall calling men to close the gate, and a boy sneaking an apple out of a basket because he was hungry. He shouted not at the Night King but at the space that was not snow. The white breath came then, a neat, hard line that cut the ranks of the dead between Jon and the heart tree just long enough to make people believe in breaking probability. Viserion's head hung over the Godswood's edge, eyes bright in the dull storm. His jaw set as if it hurt him to do this, and he would do it anyway. The white ate white. There was a path that had not existed and did now. Arya went through it the way water finds a crack in rock and makes of it a new stream. The Night King turned. Jon saw the blade. He saw the hand. He saw the dagger leave one hand and fall and be caught by the other in a motion that was not quite possible. He saw a face that had never worn understanding have to wear it for one ugly heartbeat. He saw a shattering that began in the middle and ran outward like ice when a stone is dropped in a pond. He saw blue go out. The dead fell the way men fall when they have been hit in the right place hard and know it only in the instant of falling. The sound had a terrible grace to it. It went on and on. The snow breathed. Jon breathed. The world, astonishingly, did not end. Viserion made a sound like a long sigh torn by thorns. He tried to lift and lifted. He tried to breathe and breathed not white, not blue, not anything at all. The light behind the blue in his eyes, the pale gold that had remembered Marine and summer in his mother's hand, flickered once like a candle in a hall with a door open to a winter field. Jon called his name and knew it was a human thing to do and knew he would do it anyway. Viserion looked at him and then at Daenerys and then at the heart tree. For a moment Jon thought the dragon would hold in this world a little longer by sheer unwillingness to go where the rope had gone slack. The rope is not made to hold forever, he settled. It was not a fall because he had not been truly flying. He came down like a frost sheet off a roof at dawn and broke into pieces. He broke neatly. He broke in a way that had kindness in it, if there is kindness in how things end. The pieces did not scatter far. They lay in a circle under the trees and steamed a little. When the steam cleared, there was nothing but a gloss of ice on the grass and a smell that was not rot and not incense but something thin and clean. Daenerys was on her knees without remembering going down. Yora's arm was around her without remembering putting it there. Drogon stood over them, breathing in long shuddering pulls, as if whatever animated his brother had been a wind that had also moved his own blood and had now gone away. Regal came limping, one wing held oddly, a long runnel of blood freezing along his ribs. Jon stood with his hand on the heart tree because he needed the world to be anchored somewhere, because the bark was rough and honest and would not lie to him about whether he was standing straight. Arya stood like a statue at the edge of the pond that had been carved out of snow by a breath that had not been fire. The dagger hung in her hand. Her face was neither joy nor triumph. It was purpose cooling. Bran looked at a place far away and then looked at Jon. There was something like satisfaction there, not for death but for the end of one. "It's done," Bran said. No one wept at once. Tears come when the body has time to recognize its own life. They came later. In the hall when stew tasted like food again and made a man think of other bowls. In the yard when a horse's warm neck met a cold cheek. At the foot of a wall when a girl leaned her head against stone and felt it answer her with nothing and understood that that was what walls did. For now there were bodies to count, and some to burn though it was not needed, and a thick heavy stillness in the gods' wood where a dragon had died twice and been a son once in between. Jon went to Daenerys when the yard moved like a slow river around her. Yora had risen or someone had drawn him to his feet, and gone to be wounded somewhere else like a gentleman who refuses a chair. She looked at Jon with eyes that had managed not to cry and would continue to manage because they were not built for it. He knelt. He did it without thinking of kingship or kneeling or who owed what to whom. He did it because she had lost a child and there was no throne in that. He found his way back to you, he said. He did not know if it was true precisely. He knew it as if the heart tree had said it, which is to say as a kind of winter truth different from summer truths. Thinner and harder and less forgiving, but true. She nodded once. You brought him where he could find the path. He chose it, Jon said. She breathed in as if to say more and then did not. She put her hand over his and left it there. He could feel the tremor in her fingers. He thought of telling her other truths, that the dead were dead now, that her grief had a shape it might hold, that there was still a mad woman on a throne hoarding food in a city of stone. He said none of them. They would have their time. The night had given them back the day. That was enough. There were days after that that were not so much days as the work you put into stacks. Moving wood, moving men, moving words. They buried their dead without prayers when there were too many for prayers, and with very long prayers when a mother stood behind the bier and could not stop speaking. The sky turned the color of old pewter and then of a bruise and then of something like an eggshell. A fragile pale blue that made men squint and think perhaps they had imagined nights that lasted forever. Bran slept for a whole day as far as anyone could tell. When he woke he spoke to no one about where he had been. Arya cleaned her dagger with ridiculous precision, as if she meant to return it to someone who would examine it for scratches and scold. Sansa ate bread with her fingers and set the crumbs neatly on a plate in a tiny pattern she did not look at. Davos told a joke to a boy missing half his hand and made the boy laugh, not because the joke was good, but because the man telling it had decided this boy would laugh and the boy obliged. Tyrion took his wine and stood at the edge of the godswood and looked at the place where Viserion had gone and did not drink. Even he, who had made of drinking a science and a declaration and a comfort, found the wine foreign in his mouth and put it aside. Jon made himself useful. It was the only thing he had ever known that felt like meaning. He went to the infirmary to carry water and pulled carts to the midden and stood with Lyanna Mormont's body when the bearers had slept too long and no one else was there. He went to the weirwood and put his palm on the bark and did not ask it anything because that would have made speaking to it into a habit, and he did not want to make of such things a habit. He went to Daenerys at odd hours when conversation is easier because exhaustion loosens men and women in the same way and makes them honest. Once, near dawn when even the winter sky looked tender, she sat with him on the battlements and watched the snow drift in slow lazy curls that had no mind left in them. When this is done, she said, and did not need to say what this was, because Cersei's name hung between them like a banner no one wanted to touch. Will you come south with me? It was not a small question. It was not an ordinary one. It had three meanings captive inside it and a fourth that neither of them wanted to look at. He turned it in his hands like a stone. I will come where I'm needed, he said. She gave him a look that would have been amused once. You're needed by everyone. He might have laughed if a different night had existed. No one is needed by everyone. I learned that when I died. She breathed out and made a small cloud that vanished. You say that and expect me to ignore it. I say it because it teaches me. I can't hold the north and the south in the same hand without breaking both. But I can stand beside you where the hands meet. He stopped. It sounded like Tyrion. He did not mean to sound like Tyrion. He forced himself to the simple truth beneath it. I will stand where you ask me to stand, until I cannot stand anymore. She nodded as if she had expected nothing else and had hoped for something more and would not punish him for it. Very well, she said. Stand beside me in the dragon pit and tell them what you told me here. Tell them what you told me first when you came to Dragonstone. Why? Take nothing but a name and a claim half the world laughed at. Tell them you knelt because you wanted men to live, and tell them kneeling is only useful if it serves more than the one who asks it. I can do that, he said. Good. She tilted her head. And when I ask for joy, will you kneel then too? He looked at her and felt that familiar, unwelcome, astonishing rush at her very presence. The old, young ache of a man who has found comfort in a woman who terrifies him not because she is cruel but because she is true. He set his hand over hers. If you ask for joy, I will not kneel. I will stand and take it with you because kneeling makes gifts into duties and I've had enough of those. She smiled, quick and small. You grow brave when the world's ended. It hasn't, he said. It never does. It only starts again in a shape you don't recognize. He did not know then what shape the next days would take. He knew only this, that the dead had been sent back behind a door they had kicked open, that a dragon had remembered who he was long enough to go where he was meant to go, that a girl had made a god learn fear, and that the North would feed who it could and bury who it had to. He knew the look in the eyes of the men who would march south. It was not eagerness. It was not rage. It was an emptiness that had room for purpose. He thought that might be enough. When at last they took the road, the sky was a complicated blue, the kind that promises either rain or nothing. Regal flew low to spare his injured wing. Drogon shadowed the column like a moving mountain. Viserion was not there. He would not be again. Yet when Jon lifted his face to the weather and filled his lungs with the clean, hard air, he thought he could taste, very faintly, a sweetness like the memory of apples in a cellar in a house by the sea where no one now lived. It stayed with him down the King's Road like a blessing. At dusk on the second day, when the snow had thinned to a lace that made the barren fields look almost kindly, Jon walked ahead of the column to the rise of a hill and stood there while the breath of men and horses made small fogs below. He looked south and saw a world that did not know what it owed to a dead dragon and a girl's leap. He thought of ropes, one cut, one slackened, one bound again in a knot he could not name. He thought of his own name, and the name he had learned was his and did not want, and the way men made ropes of those things to pull at one another until something broke or was bound. He heard wings and turned. Regal came low and flared, Drogon behind, Daenerys a dark curve against the paling sky. She brought the slow beat of the air with her and the smell of smoke. She brought the knowledge of what they had done and what they had left to do. She did not bring a promise because she had stopped making them. He stepped toward her. He did not kneel. She did not ask it. He lifted his hand and she took it, both of them gloved, both of them cold, both of them entirely alive. Far behind them, under the heart tree in the Godswood, a place on the frozen earth held no snow. In spring, when spring learned the way this year, grass would come up there first. Children would run and fall and laugh and never quite know why the ground felt warmer in that circle. Old men would tell a story if asked. It would change with the telling. All the truths do, but the ground would remember because ground always does, and the trees would keep their counsel. And if a wind came from the north that smelled for a heartbeat like apples in a cellar and the breath of a beast that had learned both love and obedience, only the ravens would remark on it, and then only to one another, because men are not built to hold so much remembering at once and live. Jon walked back down into the column. He took his place. He set his hand on the hilt of a sword made for killing men and thought of a thorn made for mending them. He felt the rope inside his own chest slacken and tighten and slacken again as he matched his breath to a march that would take him into a city. He did not love to meet a queen. He did not trust so that he could keep a promise that had not been spoken aloud. The wind had a salt in it now, faint and teasing, as if the sea had remembered the north and wanted to send it a kiss. He allowed himself the smallest smile, the kind you hide with a cough, and went on.